I remember back in my day, you were able to buy a game for $50 to $60 and it was finished. It was done. You could play the game from start to finish. You didn't have to wait for any DLCs or expansion passes. And if you wanted an expansion pass, it was just an extra game inside the game. It was great, says the old man that's probably still in his 20s. The current state of the game industry, especially inside the AAA space, is kind of depressing, especially for somebody who has grown up with video games. As in, it seems like everything that releases these days from these AAA companies just doesn't feel complete, and a lot of indies have been getting a lot of praise because basically they actually care about the industry. And number two, they actually finish their games and release them. Even some in early access will end up going through early access and then release as a complete game. That is always the goal because that's their dream. However, the AAA space has been around to make money, and it seems like they've actually gone pretty dang far in trying to convince everyone that they need to do as much as possible to end up making a lot of profit. And so, as games have been getting more and more cut content, more and more premium editions, more and more pre-order bonuses, and more DLC, basically they've ended up having a situation to where people have been questioning the $60 price tag. And so, Michael here, and today on Design View, we're going to be talking about should AAA video games cost more than $60? I mean, spoiler alert, just as I do in the beginning of all of these, no, they shouldn't cost more than $60 because they shouldn't need it. However, we're also going to talk about how they already cost more than $60. So first off, I want to talk about a little bit of the history. A lot of people have a misconception that video games have always cost $60. That's not really true. I believe back in the Mega Drive days, especially around where I was, games were $40 to $60. And so you can end up getting them for various different prices depending on what region you were in. It was a product that was sold just like toys or, any sort of electronic back in the day, to where a company would buy these things to sell just like toys. And so basically they would sell them at the price point that they wanted to. If they wanted to make a nice margin, they'd sell them for $60. This is mostly where the standardized pricing came from. Now, there were some more standardizations that came out in the future, and basically we ended up deciding on $50 back in the GameCube era, but then eventually we ended up going to the $60 era, especially when the 360 was out. It was $60 for every single product. However, some AAA games still do release at a cheaper price point. The Sonic games specifically, which I always end up bringing up because I actually like the Sonic games. I know everyone doesn't, but don't blame me for that. I can enjoy what I want to. They will release for $50, and not every single AAA game or AAA developer that releases content at that level releases every single game at $60, and this ends up being a nice counterpoint, especially since games go on sale quite a lot. Games don't need to be $60 if you're not, being like, oh, hey, we need to sell it at $60, and then 2 weeks later you have a sale for it on $40. We've seen this with a number of AAA games. Even Shadow of Mordor, which had a bunch of, DLC kind of plans and stuff, or Shadow of War, sorry, had a bunch of DLC and microtransactions and yada yada, was on sale 2 weeks after release. I'm sorry, but if you can't make $60, obviously you're making enough off of these microtransactions to make up for that, because otherwise you wouldn't do it, would ya? And you could say it was a storefront, but with the current marketplace, there are royalties that we end up paying to end up selling games these days, and that's how the digital storefront goes on too, but that's a topic for a whole nother video. So I want to talk about the $60 price point. Should it stay or should it go? Because the main point that people bring up is that games release unfinished, or they release with extra monetization efforts. And I think the problem actually has nothing to do with the price point. It has to do with, one, greedy corporations, obviously, but then there's also the legitimate costs of an increased... Wow, that was super glitchy and super lame. The increased development cost of an expanded market of trying to fill games with as much polish and as much content as wow, I'm just going to run out of lies, as possible. And maybe it's an overflow for developers to where we end up getting the same-ish game every single year because they do the same thing over and over again. It seems like the emulator here is kind of bugging out, so I apologize for the footage in the background. So I kind of want to talk about this in a little bit more futurist, because games already cost more than $60 when you actually look at the complete product. I did mention in the beginning of the little intro thing to where I was kind of doing a bit with an old man voice, or what sounds like an old man voice to me, I don't know, maybe old men don't sound like that. I guess I'm not around a lot of old men very often. They actually sound like normal people to me. I guess old men are normal people. Wow, I'm just digging a hole for myself. They already cost more than $60 because back in the day, to get a complete game, it was $40 to $60 depending on what area you're talking about. And so basically when you end up paying that $60 price point, you got everything, including all those things that were cut from the game, everything that was like DLCs and such. And yes, there were some cut content from game, and that's always going to be a situation. And oh my god, I did game over.
But you always ended up getting that content within the game. And so when you ended up getting that game, you had everything from start to finish, and that was it. And let's say cosmetics, for example. A lot of people have been like, cosmetics don't affect the game. The reality is, I remember the past where we had cosmetics in video games. Every single game had some sort of cosmetic change or some sort of secret ending or something along those lines, and it was just extra content to the game instead of paid DLC or paid microtransactions. Let's say, for example, fighting games, it would be like, oh, complete the story mode with this character and you unlock this outfit. And that was super, super cool. However, later on, we ended up seeing this monetization taken away, and it ends up getting literally cut from our games. You can actually see in a lot of indie titles as well to where they end up implementing these because they grew up with those concepts. They grew up with the idea of rewarding players with cosmetics for advanced tactics. Let's say, oh, hey, we have this challenge mode, or maybe we'll give them an extra outfit if they complete it on super hard, or maybe we'll just unlock an easy mode outfit just for people who have finished the game. Looking at you, Shantae, you can actually unlock a golden outfit if you just complete the game, and then it just makes the game super, super easy. Or they unlock a one-hit outfit. Which one's gold? I don't remember. But regardless, it was an interesting way to introduce cosmetics, and they added challenges to it. They added in actual game content to it. However, nowadays, it's just extra buying things. And so, yeah. So if you don't believe me on the additional costs or what it costs, let's go ahead and bring up Photoshop here, because I do have it up. I wanted to use it as a visual representation. So we're going to end up doing this again, which I haven't done in a while. I actually just got it working today. But let's say the base game cost is $60. Let's say you buy this game and it's $60. Yes, big old 6-0. This is what we're used to, or at least in the current state. If you're like me, then you're used to paying a lot less. I mean, I paid like $4 for the Tomb Raider remake because I'm patient in sales. And once again, going into the fact of they probably don't need as many sales as they end up putting on sale off so often. But we'll get into that a little bit later. Now you have $60, so this is going to be your base product. However, what's actually developed is going to be something along a little bit of a tower. And so when you end up going into game development, you don't only develop what is actually in the final game. Games normally have a lot of unfinished content or cut content as well. Even if you end up looking back at games like The Wind Waker, you had this product that they envisioned. It was complete, and they were like, yes, this is what we want to do, but they ended up having to cut out a portion of it. And they're like, oh, hey, we can't finish this part, so we're just going to cut out this entire dungeon, yada, yada. And they were able to do that in another special edition they released on the Wii U, which was actually pretty dang cool. And I haven't played it yet, but at the same time, they were able to do it in a special edition. And this is how they used to do it. For example, they would have a game, let's say the Sonic games, for example, like Sonic Adventure 2 or whatever, they would have the Adventure 2 mode. And then in the GameCube version of the game, so you ended up going to the GameCube version, they would sell the game for the exact same price that it was originally. Actually, I believe it released and it was $50, I believe. Wow, I'm really stretching my memory there. But the original game on the Sega Dreamcast was $50 as well, but you end up moving to the GameCube edition. It came with additional content because it was a special edition. It was a brand new edition. It came with the battle mode, which was a free multiplayer thing that they added into the game. Not necessarily free, but you get what I'm saying. And so this is how they ended up used to doing these situations. However, nowadays, if you want that content, let's say the game has multiplayer, oh, they'll just cut it out. Remember the online passes? Yeah, they tried that. It didn't work very well. But you have the $60 base price, but now you actually have a season pass as well. Season passes normally are $20 to $30. The most recent ones I've been seeing have been $30. I don't really pay much attention to them because, quite frankly, I don't buy into them. But now you're at $90 for a complete game. This is going to be all the content that was cut from the game. And if you don't want to think that it was cut from the game, look at games like Shadow of War, for example, to where they end up cutting out a special ending of the game unless you buy the DLCs and play through it and stuff. And so it's like, oh, hey, and they have microtransactions as well, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But then there's additional pre-order DLCs. Normally, these end up coming out and they're like, hey, pay this $90 right up front. So they want you to pay that $90 up front. So if you're thinking, oh, hey, well, they're not expecting you to buy that. They're expecting you to pay for $60, and then they're expecting you to buy the DLCs individually later, and they just have the season pass for convenience. No, they have pre-order bonuses. They want you to buy them, right away. Normally they have a bonus. This will be like a $10 price tag eventually down the line. This is normally what they end up doing. Oh, hey, now your game costs $100. This is the average cost of a AAA game at this moment in time. And it is only infinitely increasing because with the introduction of microtransactions, which I'm going to call MT for the rest of this video, because of MTs, you actually have an infinite loop to where they're able to cost the players infinite amounts of money. And so, for example, in Shadow of War, you were able to buy the orcs or whatever, and they were very burly and they were very angry and they had stats and stuff, and you could infinitely lose them. And so this made it so that this was an infinite MT. You were able to infinitely drain money. And so a player would spend $10 on an orc, kill it off, get rid of it, it's gone. Another $10 would have to be paid for a brand new orc. And this one's going to be tall and lean and have a missing arm for whatever reason and is bleeding. So yes, this ends up becoming a situation to where games cost more than $60 these days. Back in the day, you were able to get, your Street Fighter edition or whatever. So you get Street Fighter, and then you would end up getting all of your cosmetic DLCs. So each character would have a bunch of different color outfits, yada yada. Or Guilty Gear, for example, that's one that I love to bring up because I used to play it when I was a kid a lot. And so you would actually have a character, and so you would have one character, and then they would have all these different palettes. And so one of them would give them a hat, or one of them would just change their color to blue or whatever. So they'd be like, "Woo, now I'm blue." And that was interesting. And they would have different challenges for these, or maybe you would unlock them through in-game credits. I know that, for example, Mortal Kombat ended up having their crypt system to where they had a giant little thing to where there was just little tiny crypts everywhere. And you use the in-game currency that you ended up earning through playing fights to open these crypts and basically grave rob for extra content. And this ended up unlocking things like, extra stuff that didn't really matter, stuff like, concept art and stuff like that. And so you'd be able to look at like how I draw characters and stuff. Or you would end up looking at it and it would be like, oh, hey, this one's a skin, like a classic skin for Scorpion. So you'd have your nice overalls or whatever. And so you would end up going to that and they would have that additional content. However, in the later editions, they ended up removing all this and now it's just straight up DLC, pay $15 to get original Scorpio for Scorpion. And that's kind of unfortunate. And so nowadays, if you actually want a complete product, your price point is not $60. Your price point is much, much higher. Now, I want to talk about, does it actually need a higher price point? And here's the major difference between this. Indies survive perfectly fine on a $30 price tag. No, not all of them are successful, and that's just the face of the market. And yes, there are AAA games that do cost a lot to make. I remember the Tomb Raider numbers were absolutely ridiculous, but these large corporations, the way that actually calculates profit is if it made profit in an increased manner. They always have the red and the black is always going up. And now, if you go down any amount, this is considered the red at this point. And then they end up saying, oh, well, we lost money because we didn't make as much as last time. And that is considered the red for these larger corporations. However, indie studios are normally able to survive on lower price tags. Are they always going to be confident in that? No, but if indies could actually sell for $60, that would be quite nice. However, they normally have shorter games. But at the same time, some of them are worth it. And they've actually been finding this with early access systems where they're able to kind of fund their development because what they want to do is they want to finish their game. So they have this $30 price point for their early access and then later go into a $40 price point or $50 depending on the game. And so you end up looking at things like Ark Survival Evolved, for example, which ended up releasing at a higher price point later on because they wanted to fund their development, but then they had a full game cost later on. And this has been fairly successful for them. And they were able to release later expansions such as entire new maps, which actually adds quite a bit to the game. And while some people will argue that this is not necessarily a good way to do things, there are great examples of indies adding in additional content to end up monetizing their game on a longer period of time without constantly creating the situation to where $60 was no longer the base game. The problem with the $60 price point is that we want a complete game. We want to have this title here and we want the full product. We don't want something that is cut out of corners. And this is unfortunately what has been happening. And so they'll be like, oh, hey, this thing is $60 and then you have to pay an extra 20 or 30 here. And so to get the full product. And that's unfortunate. And so that's where most of this concern comes from. The reality is, though, these guys are supposed to make a living off of making video games. If they needed more than $60, why don't they charge more than $60? And this is where you sort of get into rumor mill because video game companies do not like to release a lot of their records. They don't like to say how much they're making. They don't like to release how much they're missing or how much they're not profiting. They do talk to shareholders every once in a while, but at the same time, a lot of us gamers don't really necessarily know what's going on. The reality is, though, these guys are making millions of dollars off of these games, and they're saying that millions of dollars is not enough. Wow, I just did that thing again. I did that earlier when I was playing as well, and it's just shameful. But they are supposed to be making a profitable business off of these video games, and they keep saying like, oh, we need this and this and this to keep things going. Or they have multiplayer games where it's like, oh, well, we need people spending $10,000 on every single microtransaction to make it so that our video game doesn't end up dying on the servers. The reality is, if you are running into a problem to where you can't sell your product efficiently at $60, you either need to do one of two things: fire the person who is financing your entire business, or make it so that developers are not making as huge and expansive games. It's not important to have these huge expansive games, and instead you can end up having that time spent on making other games. Instead of putting out one game that's supposed to take up 300 hours of your time, make it so that you release several different products that would take up hundreds of hours of time, but all sell for $60. Take out the microtransactions, take out the additional DLCs. Instead, focus on releasing expansions. Maybe provide a feature for your game, make it so that you can release a single product. The problem with the $60 price point and trying to increase it is that there are so many ways to make the $60 price point effective. And the real killer here is that a video game product, and I'll end up doing a video on this in the future, if it doesn't release before this one, I am recording it soon. I probably will release it before this one. I'm not 100% sure yet. We'll see what happens in the future. But the reality of a product is whether a price or not is worth it to an individual. When you end up looking at a lot of niche products, they end up charging a little bit more for a niche product. You can end up looking at some of my reviews, for example, the Neptunia games sell for like $60 or $50. Actually, no, they released for $40 on PC. So that's even incorrect. But Senran Kagura was $50 when it ended up releasing, and a lot of people were like, I don't know if that's worth it. But people who are into Senran Kagura were like, hell yeah, I'll pay $60 for that, hell yeah. Like, they were like, hey, I'm gonna buy this $50 thing, and then I'm gonna buy all the DLCs to release, because they love the game. And so that's where the value proposition comes in. But for most of these AAA titles, the problem with increasing that price is those niche titles are not going to sell to a non-niche audience if they didn't have any sort of sale on the game. You know, like, let's say the average Joe isn't going to pick up Senran Kagura as $50. They're going to be like, hell no, that's definitely not worth it. And the AAA space isn't going to have a loyal following because it doesn't really play into a niche genre. And there are niche genres in there, but generally speaking, like, let's say Gone Home, for example, which was a fairly niche game in its own right, they actually sold that one as a complete product and didn't expand upon it and release microtransactions or DLCs, which was interesting, to say the least. I thought they would, but they didn't. And so that was kind of a missed opportunity on their end. But at the same time, there's so many different ways to make that price point work. And if they start increasing the price, and this is why they haven't, and this is why they've had to end up manipulating people, is that people don't want to pay more than $60 for a product. If you're paying more than $60 for a game up front, then you're like, all right, well, what am I getting for the $60? And they start wondering, like, hey, is the $60 actually worth the product? And most of the time, it will not be worth more than $60. And if you get into the season passes, the reason why season passes work is because it's an additional cost. Everything goes on to an upfront cost. It's a psychological thing to where you end up looking at a product. Let's say, oh, hey, I'm going to go ahead and jump over back to Photoshop here because I can. Also, I love this music. I don't want to click off it, but I'm going to. But you end up looking at a product and it will be like, oh, hey, this is only $60, right? You see that big 60. But in fine print, it's like $30 more for the full product, you know, like $30 for ketchup or something. So I'd be like, for ketchup, you got to get that. It's kind of like when you go to a restaurant, it's like, hey, you can get the sandwich, but it's an extra $4 for cheese. And you're like, oh, well, it was only a $2 sandwich, but now I got to pay $4 for cheese. And this is how they end up getting people, because it's like, oh, I'm only spending $60. And it's like, oh, yeah, there's this $30, because $60 and $30 alone doesn't sound like $90. And this is why the so-called 99 cents thing comes out as well. Like 99 cents seems like 99 cents. It's like, oh, it's just a few cents, right? Instead of $1. That is straight up $1. And that is how I've always seen it. 99 cents? No, it's $1. And of course, with sales tax, if you're in a region like I am, you're going to have sales tax. So it's going to be over $1. It's going to be like $1.08 or whatever it's going to be right now. But at the same time, you know, it's all manipulation. You end up looking at all these kind of gambling tactics they've introduced into things like loot boxes and microtransactions. They just want an infinite pool of money from these individual products. And the reality is they're not making products that are going to appeal to everyone. I think what they should do is they should make it so that they are producing maybe more but lesser games. So they can be like, oh, hey, we don't need this game to have literally 10,000 useless side quests. Instead, let's just make it so that we have half the dev team, make it half the size of a game, but have it have a meaningful story, have it have meaningful content. Maybe they can start releasing games at $50. Look at stuff like Sega's releases, for example. Sega and a lot of other smaller Japanese companies. I know Sega's not a small Japanese company, but bear with me here. They'll release things like Sonic Forces, for example. I know, not the best game out there, but it was only $50 on release instead of a full $60 release, and they didn't do any paid DLC or anything. At least they didn't on PC. All the PC DLC was free. And so they ended up just releasing a $50 product. They gave us a lot of cosmetics inside that game that they could easily added extra monetization for. But they didn't care to because the game was already going to make a profit at $50. That was the price point that they needed. And of course, they were able to look at this and be like, hey, is this worth supporting in the future? And they can always add in expansions or DLC in the future if they want to and expand upon the game. Yes, it was fairly short and it is a smaller game, but at the same time, I feel satisfied with my purchase. And while some people are disappointed that the game wasn't absolutely amazing, it was a $50 new release and it had some interesting ideas and I actually enjoyed playing it. And once again, for other sorts of games and remasters and things along those lines coming out and they're costing a little bit less. And those games end up feeling complete and fulfilling. However, whenever I buy a game for $60, which I haven't done for years, it just never felt complete and it never felt worth that $60 price point. And especially when you end up going into it and you look at the product and you're like, this isn't a complete product, it's had half of it cut out. So the reality of the situation is, do AAA games need to cost more than $60? No, because they already do. If you want a full product, you have to pay more than $60 to get it. If you don't want a full product, then sure, you can end up buying the basic edition. You can buy the base game and be like, all right, well, I'm just going to get the basic content. But it'd be like getting Sonic the Hedgehog and not having the special stages. It'd be like getting Sonic the Hedgehog and not having an ending in some cases. Like, that would be terrible. It'd be like going in, playing Sonic the Hedgehog and having 0 lives at every single point, or having no rings in every level. You got to pay a DLC to get it. It's just, it would feel incomplete. It would feel unfinished, and it would feel shredded. It would feel ruined. And this is one of the major reasons why I'm not really into the AAA market anymore, is the fact that they've just been shredding the games to shreds. And I feel like it's going to end up running into a situation to where they kill the game industry. They kill the AAA market because basically people are not willing to pay more than $60, but to get the product that they want, they're gonna have to eventually. And so once again, it's like $100 for these brand new games. And I've watched people buy all into stuff like Shadow of War and they spent like $400 on a single game and they're like, it wasn't worth it. And this is extremely dangerous. And so I think that people suggesting that these games should cost more than $60 is not only ignoring the real price point of these games to actually get the full experience, but it's also ignoring the real problem. The AAA space is just stuck in this situation to where they just want to constantly make these huge products, or they want to make these misleading products. And not only, are companies trying to get as much money as possible out of people, but they're also ignoring that they could end up making more products and make a profit off of them if they just brought back their scope, made it so that they focused on specific games and just made things to make things again. And this is something that indies have picked up, and this is the reason why indies have become so popular in these day and times, because indies release full products. They release games that are passionately made, and no, not every single indie is going to be included in that, and yes, I know that. But at the same time, there's a lot of passionate people out there, and not every publisher is bad as well. Like I said, Sega released a game full, complete. It was done. It was a complete game. Sonic Forces was a complete game when it ended up releasing, had tons of cosmetics, didn't have any extra monetization. But it was a complete product. It was $50. It wasn't even $60. It's possible to do it. And I don't see why publishers aren't doing it more, because if they end up looking at stuff like, let's say, Grown Home, for example, which was a huge success, it was a small $20 product that they ended up releasing. They had a small team working on it, but people loved that game. It was absolutely fantastic, and I enjoyed every second that I was playing with it. Even my sister enjoyed it, who's not really into video games. So even for a mainstream market, if they started advertising it and started advertising their services and being like, hey, we've got this new game, then boom, they can end up making it work, but they just refuse. And so, do games need to cost more than $60? No, they already do, and they shouldn't cost more than $60. They really shouldn't be trying to dig out money. Instead, they should end up looking at it and being like, hey, we need our professionals to be professional and do their freaking jobs and actually make it so that we can afford business. If you're a business and you're trying to make video games and you can't afford it, then you need to reevaluate what you're doing. You need to look at your business model and be like, all right, what can we do? Be like indies. Be like, hey, maybe we need to go into early access. Maybe we need to go into all this, and stop trying to, oops, I might die. Oh God. Stop trying to exploit your customers. And that is the major problem here. Anyways, that's going to be me for this topic. Hopefully it was enjoyable, and obviously leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And also, if you like this series or any of the other series, you can always end up helping out over on the Patreon. You can end up subscribing even just $1, and it ends up helping out a lot. I'm trying to shield this for a few videos. I don't know if I'll keep doing it in the future. Obviously, leave your thoughts in the comments. I'm not, very comfortable doing Patreon, I guess. I don't know. I'm just new to it. But yeah, I also make a bunch of posts on Patreon. I'm starting to do that now. And so basically, if you want updates on the channel and future content, and if you want to suggest content as well, you can end up going over there on the comments. My posts about content in the future is all public and stuff, so you can end up looking at that. So yeah. And what do you think about prices of video games? I think video games cost way too much, quite frankly, as a personal opinion. As a business, I think the video games are at a cost point to where I think it's right where people want it to be. And so what businesses need to do is they need to find ways to make it so that they can profit off of these margins, because otherwise they're just going to run into a situation to where they just don't sell a product. If people are not willing to buy the product at the price point they offer because it's like, oh, hey, we budgeted incorrectly and we need to make this much money, they need to find other ways to make that money. And they just need to do it without exploiting users and such. And this is why microtransactions have been so popular. Anyways, video's over, so I'll see you guys in the next video. And I might play Sonic for a little bit because I'm enjoying this. I'm also playing absolutely terrible in the background because I'm trying to remember a bunch of my notes, and as you've probably noticed, I forgot over half of them while I was chatting. So yeah, and hopefully the Photoshop thing, oh my god, I died again. Hopefully the Photoshop thing was interesting. Bye. See you guys in the next video. That's how I'm supposed to end them. I'm terrible at this. God damn it.